Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in day to talk about Oshi chapter number 152. This chapter is titled Interview. And I'll be remiss to say here, if I don't mention it, yes, this chapter has the regular star icon where the chapter title is. It's normal, it's nothing weird, it's nothing different. It does seem a little bit small because, I'm reading this on the computer screen like I normally do to do these reviews, and I normally read a chapter, of course, whenever they first come out on my phone, and then to do the actual review here so I can record on my phone, obviously, and not be, holding it and muffling up the audio and all of that deal. I pulled up the chapter on my computer, and I would like to say I've got a decently sized computer screen here. I mean, I guess I could make it a bit bigger by closing out all of the windows or whatever, or not closing out the windows, but closing out the borders, but that doesn't matter. All I'm trying to say is this star icon is a little small right here, which I do find a bit funny considering in the manga volumes, which, I don't know, my manga volume pages are maybe a bit bigger than what I'm actually actively seeing on my computer. I can definitely see how these stars get really, really small, and how some people may not be able to read them in the volumes, but whatever, I digress. This is a chapter of Oshi, and really, it's a very interesting chapter because while there isn't much in the way of, furthering on a lot of plot development, it's a lot of closing up some character stories and moving on in the timeline. It does open up a big deal and a big reveal at the end of the chapter, and it ties back to something that we saw all the way back in the beginning of the manga, the first exactly about 9 or 10 chapters of the Oshi manga, and here we are about 140 chapters later, so very interesting, but I will get back to that at the very end, but I really don't have anything else to say, so I just say let's go and hop into it. Again, this is chapter number 142, titled Interview. And if you would believe where this chapter starts off, well, it is in an interview, as we see that director Gotanda or director Taishi Gotanda, if you want to use his first name also there. We see that he's getting interviewed by some person. We don't actually see this person's face or anything, but we do just see a side of their head, and we do see that it is somebody with some white hair to them, right? So, eventually, we start off with Gotanda just talking, presumably after being asked, an interview question. And Gotanda's just like, hey, I had no intention of making a fictional movie at all. This is a true creative work disguised as entertainment. This is good enough for my interview, right? And we see the interviewer's like, all right, well, any final words? And we see that Gotanda is silent for a minute or two, and eventually he says, I dedicate this movie to I. That is all. And beside him, we see the poster board for the 15-year live movie, which is pretty much I with her back facing towards the poster, and just the words 15-year lie written on it. And I find it really funny that every time the Manga Plus translation team feels a need to write down on the margins, all right, this is the board, it reads 15-year lie, when I do find it really funny because at this point, this little marking has probably been in every single chapter for at least the past 30 to 40 chapters. This whole movie making thing has been going on for a while, and by this point, everybody who reads this should really know what this means. I just do find that a little funny, right? But at this point, we start to get some narration of events going on. As we see, there's a bunch of people in a movie theater walking into a room, as the narration just reads, November. First screening for everyone involved. And this is a little interesting because we get a little bit more confirmation on the timeline of Oshi. Of course, we know that this is the same year which Kana graduated, and she graduated early, she didn't graduate early, but Japanese graduations typically happen around that March, February time-ish. So we know that that was the time between there, and then a few chapters ago, we got the chapter obviously titled, the end of summer. So we know that's, end of summer, August, September, ending in there, so fall can begin. So we know that was, probably around the September time, which means that's whenever they wrapped up filming. So the editing and all of that took about till November for the first screening for everybody to actually happen. And we pretty much just get more continued narration, pretty much going Director Gotanda gave a brief speech, and the film, which clocked in at 2 hours and 16 minutes, was screened. as we pretty much see just a few action shots of the movie while everybody's just sitting in this theater. Of course, with the Oshinoko of like, hey, this is something on a screen, so it has lines running through it, so you know it isn't real. And pretty much narration just continues saying like, hey, you could hear people sobbing here and there as the end credits rolled. There must have been a sense of accomplishment for having been involved in this movie, but some must have also cried because the story was just sad. However, these tears are surely neither of those, as we see a close-up to Akane, who is also crying, who, presumably, what this is saying is that Akane is not crying for either of these two reasons. I'm honestly not really 100% sure what this could mean quite yet. I don't know if it has something to do with Aqua. I mean, if it's the Akane storyline, it probably does have something to do with Aqua. I mean, like, what are we kidding here? But just the whole thing of like, hey, for many of these people, since the accomplishment for getting to work on this movie and do this big successful things, and also because the story was just sad, which makes perfect sense why somebody would cry during a movie, because yes, some movies can get pretty sad, but I'm just interested in what Akane's whole take on this is. Like, hey, these tears are surely none of those. It's a little interesting. But we eventually see some of our other main cast walking out of the theater, as we specifically see Frill, Ruby, and Mimcho all walking out together, as Frill's is like, man, how can I put it? I mean, Director Gotanda is just amazing, isn't he? And she's just like, I just can't stop crying, as we see just tears pulling out of her eyes and just running down her face, as Mimcho's like, Frill-chan, like, are you okay? Like, everything alright? As Mimcho just even says, like, hey, you're crying in, like, a very unusual way, like, it's weird, right? But Frill eventually just says, like, hey, I know everyone was doing their best, but she's like, truth to be told, there was honestly some poor acting inside of the movie. And she's like, so I honestly wondered how good the movie would turn out to be. And she's like, I mean, it doesn't really matter because just the pros are amazing after all, right? And Ruby, who is standing by this entire time, is like, poor acting? Like, who is she referring to? And at this point, we see that Akane and Kana also walk into the room. And as Ruby just says this, like, what are you talking about, poor acting, right? Kana walks up and is like, Ruby, she is talking about you. You were the person who was acting poorly, right? And we don't even see Ruby say anything because Frill speaks up, and Frill's just like, hey, the editing was done in quite a way that even the poor acting looked very attractive, right? And Mimcho's just like, yeah, it seems like Aqua put a lot of editing in all of those parts, right? And Kana just says like, oh, so I guess Aqua is still obsessed with his sister even at times like this, which, okay, get the jokes out of here. It's alright. I think it was a decently funny joke because, oh, look at that, Aqua edited a movie, and he made sure to edit all the scenes and make his sister look more flattering. Alright, okay. Definitely no deeper implications in there. We learned about all of those last chapter. They just simply don't exist. It's Aqua and Kana, that's where this is going. No Aqua and Ruby, but it sort of is what it is. As, we eventually see that Mel also walks into the room, which I'm happy because we haven't really seen Mel and gotten a line from Mel in a little while, which is nice. As Mel walked into the room and he's just like, well, it was definitely rough at the beginning, but the last scene was something only Ruby could do. And he's like, hey, it was only possible because she is the one who did it. As we eventually see that Ruby looks over to Mel and she runs over him like, oh, master, thank you. And Mel's just like, all right, I do not care what's going on here. Do not call me that. As he's just like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. As some more narration begins, just saying like, yes, Ruby's final act determined how everyone felt about this movie. This movie called 15-Year Lie. As we eventually do a sudden page cut to another conversation between two of our other very important characters, mainly director Gotanda and producer Kaburagi, as the two of them are standing in a smoking lounge, of course, in a movie theater, because you don't want to smoke in the movie theater, you need to do it somewhere else. As we see that both Kaburagi and Gotanda are standing here, and producer Kaburagi just eventually, as they're just sitting here smoking, turns around to Gotanda and is like, hey, director, were you able to get that final shot that you wanted? Did you capture the real Ai Hoshino? And Gotanda takes another drag on a cigarette, breathes it all in, then blows out all of the smoke out of the end of it. And Gotanda eventually just says, like, who knows? In the end, I can't give that definitive answer. But Gotanda says then, like, but I feel like my regrets have faded away, and I can finally move towards the future. And eventually, he takes a cigarette out from near his mouth, and he sort of holds it down to his side, as he turns to Kaburagi and just says, like, hey, isn't that the case for you too? And he says, you've always felt guilty and responsible for introducing Ai Hoshino and Hikaru Kamiki to each other, haven't you? And we get this shot of Kaburagi just standing there, staring down at the cigarette in his hand, and Gotanda just speaks up again, just saying, like, hey, you used all the cards that you had, including money, connections, to make this project a reality. You pushed yourself too hard, didn't you? If this movie doesn't become a hit, your future position will be in jeopardy. As Gotanda says, like, oh, just to make amends with I, and for those children's sake. As we see a few interesting visuals here, whenever Gotanda speaks of, like, all of the money and connections and everything, we see a few characters. We see in the background, we see three characters mainly. The first character is Sumaki Raida, who was the 2.5D stage play director guy. He was the one who pretty much was the lead producer for all of that, so obviously that he'd get his help. And in the background are two of the people who funded the movie, two of the shareholders, stockholders, whatever you want to call them, the people who donated money to the movie to make sure that it worked well and that they could get paid back out, and pretty much showing, yes, Kaburagi used all of the stops he could have to make this movie. Of course, as we obviously saw before, I think it was like, I don't know, chapter 111, because I remember what happened in that chapter, because that was the first Oshinoko chapter review I actually did, so of course I'd remember what happened there. Pretty much collecting all of the money to make this movie the best thing it could be. And obviously, as Who's His Face says, as Gotanda says, just to make amends with I, and for those children's sake. Obviously think about Aqua and Ruby in this moment, right? But eventually I'll cut back into the scene here as Kaburagi sort of starts to say something as he pulls his cigarette away from his mouth again after doing another long drag on it. And Kaburagi just is like, hey, I'm not young enough to feel guilty about such things anymore. I'm not passionate, you know? And Gotanda is like, he's like, I don't really know about that. As Gotanda's like, hey, Kaburagi-san, it seems that you got into this industry to become a film director. Am I right? And at this point, we see that Kaburagi turns to the side, is like, as he just like coughs, like obviously like, oh no, he caught me. And Kaburagi's like, oh, where did you hear that? Like, what's going on here, Gotanda? And Gotanda is just like, hey, it's a really small world, and even now, you still haven't given up, have you? And eventually Gotanda just says, like, hey, it's a lie to say that such a person isn't passionate. As Kaburagi eventually is like, okay, and he eventually sticks his cigarette into the ashtray and walks away, and he just says, good grief, you're really such a bad guy, right? And Gotanda's like, alright, come on, don't be so sulky on me. As we see that Kaburagi goes to leave the room, and on his way out, as he opens the doors, we see the movie board poster sitting on a little stand there, and he turns to the poster, looking at Ai. He just says, "Oh man, do you hate me?" But then he thinks for a second. He's like, "No, since it's you, I'm sure you just laugh and say, what are you talking about?" He's like, "Did I become of any help, even just a little?" And we see this little image of Kaburagi sitting on the ground, treating Ai to some food, as we see that he's just like looking on and just wishing her the best, as we just cut away from this little image here on the ground, as we obviously see that they've got McDonald's. I just now realized that that imagery, because of course it's the McDonald's logo turned upside down so it looks like a W. I cannot believe I missed that. Oh, this is like my fourth read through of this chapter, and I cannot believe I missed that iconography down there in the corner. But either way, we seem to wrap up a bit of producer Kaburagi's character. Obviously, wrapping up his whole feelings on Ai and that whole situation with his whole thing of like, hey, did I even help you just a little? Even though he does feel regrets for introducing her to Kamiki and eventually leading to her death in a very indirect way. But very interesting to see, and also the whole thing of him wanting to be a director. I don't know if we've known that before, but it is decently interesting. But at this point, we cut to the final scene of the chapter, as we see that this is taking place in Conference Room F, presumably on the site of the movie theater, but also, we don't really quite know at this point. As we see, it looks like the same interview from before, somebody with white hair is interviewing Aqua. As we see the cameras rolling and Aqua is sitting on a chair as the the interviewer starts to ask Aqua some questions, as he just continues like, hey, well, let's start the interview, shall we? And this interviewer says, I watched the screen too, and I think your character portrayal was a very painful one, and yet you still appeared in this movie. Did you do that for your mother, Ai Hoshino-san's sake, and your sister Rumi Hoshino-san? And Aqua is sitting there for a second, and eventually looks towards the camera, as he says, I'm not trying to make people happy with my acting. I act for my own sake, and it's up to everyone to decide how they feel about it. As eventually the interviewer just says like, but Aqua, it feels like you care so much about other actors, and they also care about you. As Aqua just says, I don't love anyone, and even if someone loves me, I never give anything back. I hope only those who are okay with that will like me. And after saying that, we see that Aqua takes a vow of silence for a second, as we get a close-up on the film camera filming Aqua, as the interviewer just says, that's a lie, isn't it? And the interviewer speaks up again, just saying, it's because they're important to you that you keep your distance from them. And Aqua says, I don't care how you interpret it. As the interviewer says, why would you go that far to bottle yourself up? As we get a shot of the mouth of this interviewer, as suddenly Aqua's just silent for a second more, and then Aqua speaks up. Because acting is my revenge. As we cut the page, and we see that Aqua continues on saying, because acting is my revenge to you, Hikaru Kamiki, the one who took our mother away from us. As we find out now that the interviewer was Hikaru. And we've got one more page left, and then I'm going to dive into everything this means, because this is a lot to unpack, right? But on the final page, Aqua just continues saying, hey, unless I get my revenge on you, we won't be able to move towards the future. As we see that in this moment, we see Hikaru's dark Starringons and Aqua's light Starringons shining through the black, as we get the message of Oshinoko, final arc, towards the stars and dreams. And that is where we finish off this chapter of Oshinoko. Now, there's a lot to break down here, and the first spot I want to begin in is this final scene, or the first and final scenes of this chapter, where directly Gotanda is getting interviewed and where Aqua is getting interviewed. Now, we have actually seen both of these scenes before in the Oshinoko manga. Because, I don't know if you guys remember, but in Volume 1 of the manga, about the first, from chapter about 2 to chapter 10, one of the big things was the first page of every chapter was interviews with select characters. And I actually have my Oshinoko Volume 1 here in front of me to go through all of these and sort of break them down. Because presumably, Hikaru was the person interviewing all of the people this entire time. So in chapter 2, it was Ruby. There's not really too much to say this one. It doesn't seem like Hikaru interviewed there. The second one is actually Miyako. We just see that she's at a bar while this is happening. Not really too much there. The fourth one is an interview with an idol otaku, the guy that we've seen plenty of through the series. And it doesn't really get interesting until we get into chapter 5 here, where we see the exact same scene that opened up this chapter, with Gotanda being interviewed by, of course, who we know is Hikaru. Like, we see all of the white hair, and we can definitely tell everything. And, it pretty much reads word for word, as, pretty much we just see that Gotanda says all of the words and everything, and eventually, as everything goes through, as Gotanda gets up, as he gets up in this chapter, and into chapter 5, you see, like, hey, this movie's dedicated to I, that is all. And, that's really all there is to it. It's the exact same scene, the exact same place. So it's obvious that Hikaru was interviewing Gotanda here, and it seems like that's why Gotanda kept all of his questions a little short, because he definitely knew what was going on here. So very interesting. And then chapter 6 of the manga, we see it was Kana. I'd be very interesting to see this scene in the manga itself, because it was just a very interesting one. Going on a bit more, chapter 7 was Aqua and Ruby's kindergarten teacher. That one's honestly just not important to the plot whatsoever. Chapter 8 is the ex-manager, of course, Saito, pretty much getting his whole take on it, and it makes sense why he gets so pissed off at the story if he knows that it's Hikaru, like a little bit of just like that foresight going back to it. And eventually we reach chapter 9, which is of course where Aqua does his whole spiel and testimony, as it reads pretty much again the exact same as we see at the end of the chapter. Of course, Aqua's got that same very stupid face to him. Like, Aqua's hairstyle here, I think is incredibly ridiculous, with, like, sort of, like, the shaved on one side, but a lot more hair running down. It really makes Aqua look stupidly edgy. But, yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same exact lines, with Aqua just saying, like, hey, I don't act to make people happy, I act for my own sake. If it makes people feel anything, then they need to decide how they feel about it. He's like, hey, I won't love anyone. If someone loves me, they won't get anything back. The only people who should fall for me are the ones who are okay with that. And he's like, and they can if they want. And eventually the end of that is Aqua just saying, like, hey, to me, acting is a revenge. And here in this chapter, if this is chapter 9, this is like, what, 143 chapters later, we finally get the ending to that, where in this chapter, Aqua actually says, to you, Hikaru Kamiki, the one who took our mother away from us. Which is so deeply interesting, with that whole idea of, oh, look at this callback. I mean, Aka Akasaka, the writer of this series, has obviously been planning this for a very, very long time. They had this set up all the way there in chapter 9. Of course, this could be a situation where they just finally tied in all of that previous stuff together here and didn't necessarily have this plan. But the way it definitely reads is it totally reads like this scene was planned from the beginning of the manga, which is just a very awesome thing to do. As interesting to note, during this entire scene, we haven't seen Aqua at all in this chapter, but during this scene, Aqua has the light Sharingan the entire time, and of course Hikaru has the dark Sharingans, so sort of that sort of acting and star prowess, just very interesting to see. And then the other big revelation at the end of the chapter is Oshinoko final arc, Towards the Stars and Dreams, which means that Oshinoko is getting very, very close to over. Now, there's not really anything to say, like, right now, like, oh no, how long till the series is going to be ending, like, do we have very long, do we have, like, how much time do we have, because that is a very big thing in Oshinoko. Now, if I'm not mistaken, we have been in the current act, which has been the movie-making arc. We've been in this for about 30 chapters, if I'm not mistaken. Or no, we've been in... Yeah, okay. So we have been in Act 10, which was called The End of the Play, and we have been in this act, I think, for, I'm actually on the Oshinoko Wiki right now. Let me check this. Yeah, we've been in the sort of End of the Play for about 5 chapters now, as we got End of Summer, By the Sea, Knife, and Interview, all of these chapters. But, of course, the one before that was the movie arc, and it was 39 chapters. So there is a good amount of stuff going on here. Most arcs in Oshinoko typically average out at about 15 chapters, if I remember correctly, because of course we've got the longer ones like the movie and the 2.5D stage play, but then there's like some of them that just aren't long at all, like the reality dating show, and most of them, so it averages out at about 15 chapters. So I would say that we probably have about 15 to 20 chapters of Oshinoko left. I don't think that this series will end before the anime ends, because of course the anime is airing right now, and I feel like it would be a really big move to end the manga the same day that like the final episode of the anime releases, because right now we've got the anime coming out. And the anime comes out on Wednesdays, the same day that Oshi no Ko chapters come out, which of course is Thursdays in Japan. So I think it'd be very interesting if the manga ended the same day the season ended. But at that point, it would only lead us to have about maybe 10 more chapters of Oshi no Ko left. We are definitely closer to the end of this series than the beginning at this point. I mean, that was a very stupid thing to say because we've been like that for a very long time. But at the same point, now that I'm thinking about it, Oshi no Ko has always done the same sort of schedule of it has 10 chapters per volume. It's had that since the beginning. And if this is currently chapter number 152, that means we probably may only have, I guess we either have 8 or 18 chapters of Oshi no Ko left. I would, of course, prefer to have 18, as I enjoy talking about the series and don't want it to end. But, yeah, we're going to either have 8 or 18 chapters right now. I will call this right now. You guys can come back to this video to be like, oh no, he was right, or oh no, he was wrong. And if we only have 8 chapters, that may be the amount of episodes we have left. I'm honestly not sure. This is just a bunch of speculation at this point. We really just have no idea. But, yeah, either way, I don't have too much else to say. There was a lot that happened in this chapter. Like, a lot, of course. The whole interview with Gotanda at the beginning. The, very ominous meaning of, Akane's tears on the 3rd page of the chapter. Like, what does that mean? What's going on there? And, of course, just the whole thing with all of the characters intermingling with each other. Gotanda and Kaburagi speaking, and Kaburagi's, hang-ups on introducing Hikaru and his dream of becoming a director. And eventually the whole revenge thing at the end of the chapter. It's just so very interesting, and I'll be really excited to see where it goes next time in chapter number 153. But yeah, this is just a great chapter. Like, hey, just that moment of turning the page to realize that, like, you have a speculation that this is probably Hikaru, but not knowing until the very last page of the chapter, like, oh, it's his revenge to you, Hikaru Kamiki. Very great line, great delivery, great layout by, of course, all the paneling and everything done by Mingo Yoriki, the artist. Just, my head is off to this duo doing Oshi no Ko, but with that, I don't have too much left to say. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. Thank you guys for watching again, and this was chapter number 152, titled Interview. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time to start the final arc of Oshi no Ko. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out.